The cowboy said, "Look, it's swelling." Then he lifted the Apache woman's skirt in shock. A lone cowboy rode slowly along the narrow trail, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He was a tall man, weathered by years of traveling through harsh lands. His hat shaded his eyes, but the lines on his face told the story of someone who had seen both danger and kindness in equal measure. For days he had been traveling alone, moving westward in search of work and shelter. The land was beautiful, but it was unforgiving. Water was scarce and the nights were cold. He had learned to read the sky, to understand the signs of coming storms, and to trust his instincts. Today, the clouds were gathering quickly, dark and heavy, signaling a storm that would not wait for him. He urged his horse to move faster, hoping to find some kind of shelter before the rain arrived. As the first drops began to fall, he spotted a small settlement in the distance. It was not much, just a few wooden structures and smoke rising from a fire, but it was enough to offer refuge. He approached cautiously, knowing that this was Apache territory. Stories of conflict between cowboys and the Apache people were common, and he did not want to cause trouble. He slowed his horse and studied the village from a distance. The people were busy, moving about their tasks, seemingly unbothered by the approaching storm. One figure caught his attention more than the others. A woman, standing near a small garden, seemed to move with quiet determination. Her hair was dark, her skin sun-kissed and strong from years of living outdoors. She worked quickly, tending to the plants with careful hands. The cowboy felt a mix of curiosity and caution. He had heard many stories of Apache women being strong and independent, and this one fit the description perfectly. He dismounted a few feet away from the path, keeping his distance but allowing her to notice him. The woman's eyes met his, and for a moment there was a silent understanding between them. She did not smile, but she did not appear hostile either. It was a delicate balance of trust and caution, the kind that was learned from years of living in a land where strangers could be both friend and foe. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly and called out in a calm voice, "Evening. I'm just looking for shelter from the storm." The rain was starting to fall heavier now, splattering against the earth and turning the soil soft and muddy. The woman moved aside, gesturing toward a wooden structure nearby that appeared to be her home. The cowboy nodded in gratitude and followed, careful not to step too close to the delicate plants she was tending. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of herbs and wood smoke. The storm raged outside, but within these walls there was a strange sense of calm. The woman set a small pot on the fire and motioned for him to sit. He did so, taking in his surroundings. The space was simple but neat, with a few handmade decorations and practical items scattered about. It was clear that she had lived here alone for some time, managing everything herself. As they sat in silence, the cowboy noticed a slight tension in her movements. She was careful, deliberate, and occasionally glanced at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. It was clear that she had not had many visitors, and certainly not strangers from outside her community. He wanted to speak, to ease the silence, but he also did not want to offend her. He finally said, "I don't mean any harm, I'm just trying to get through the storm." He felt a strange sense of admiration, mixed with a curiosity he could not explain. The storm outside intensified, rain pelting against the wooden walls, wind howling through the gaps in the structure. The cowboy could hear the distant rumble of thunder, and he knew the night would be long. The woman moved closer to the fire, and he noticed her hand tremble slightly as she adjusted the pot. Something was off, he realized, something she was not saying. He wanted to ask, but he did not want to overstep. He watched her carefully, hoping to understand what was troubling her. After a moment she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "It is nothing," she said, though her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. The cowboy studied her face, sensing that she was hiding something important. He had seen this look before, people who bore pain quietly, unwilling to ask for help. He decided to tread carefully. "If it is nothing, I won't press," he said. "But sometimes sharing helps, even a little." The cowboy could feel the tension in the room shift slightly. They were no longer complete strangers. There was a fragile thread of trust forming between them. As the night deepened, the storm continued unabated. The cowboy offered her some water from his canteen, and she accepted with a quiet nod. He could see her hands, strong yet careful, moving with precision as she stirred the pot on the fire. Then he noticed it, a slight swelling on her arm, partially hidden by the sleeve of her dress. It was subtle but enough to make him pause. He had seen injuries before, and instinct told him that this was not a simple bruise or irritation. "Look at your arm," he said gently, pointing without touching. She followed his gesture, her eyes flicking down quickly before meeting his again. There was hesitation, a moment of fear, and then she pulled back slightly. He understood that whatever it was personal, perhaps even dangerous to reveal, but his concern was genuine. "It might need attention," he said softly. "I can help." The moment was intimate and charged, not in a romantic sense, but in the gravity of trust and vulnerability. The woman watched him closely, her breathing steady but her eyes alert. He could see the pain she had endured silently, the effort it took for her to allow help. The storm outside seemed to fade in importance compared to the moment unfolding within the small room. He whispered reassurances, words she might not fully understand, but the tone mattered more than the language. Hours passed as the rain continued to fall, and the cowboy remained attentive. He improvised a way to soothe the swelling with materials available: clean water, cloth, and careful hands. The woman gradually relaxed, allowing him to work without resistance. There was a rhythm to their movements, a silent communication that transcended words. Each gesture, each careful touch, built a bridge between two very different lives. By the time the storm subsided, the swelling had reduced slightly, enough to show that care and attention were working. The woman looked at the cowboy with a mix of gratitude and cautious relief. He nodded to her, silently acknowledging her strength and bravery. They had shared a moment that would not be forgotten, a moment where fear was met with compassion and mistrust with patience. As dawn approached, the cowboy prepared to leave the small dwelling. The night had been long, but it had also been revealing. He had learned that appearances could be deceiving, that resilience often masked hidden pain, and that kindness could cross barriers of culture and experience. The woman stood by the doorway, watching him mount his horse. There was no need for words. Their shared understanding was enough. He tipped his hat one last time and rode away, the plains stretching endlessly before him. Behind him, the woman returned to her garden, tending to her plants with renewed focus. Though their encounter had been brief, it left a lasting impression on both of them. Trust, respect, and a moment of vulnerability had woven a connection that neither time nor distance could easily erase. The cowboy continued westward, the rising sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. He thought of the widow, her quiet strength, and the swelling that had revealed more than just physical pain. It had revealed courage, endurance, and the unspoken bond of two humans meeting in a vast, untamed land. He smiled faintly, knowing that life was full of unexpected encounters, and sometimes even a stranger could leave an indelible mark on one's soul. The morning after the storm was calm and quiet. The plains were washed clean, the dust settled, and the air smelled fresh and crisp. The cowboy rode slowly along the trail, thinking about the night he had spent at the widow's home. The image of her cautious eyes and quiet strength stayed with him. He had expected to encounter danger, but instead he had found a human story, a story of endurance, trust, and resilience. Even as he moved further from her small dwelling, her presence lingered in his mind like a gentle echo. He had traveled many miles alone, but something about this place made him feel connected. He couldn't explain it fully, but the desert and the small Apache village had a way of teaching lessons that were hidden beneath the surface. Sometimes, it was not the people he met that mattered most, but the moments that changed his perception of life. This was one such moment. A few days later, fate seemed to guide him back toward the village. He had heard of a trail nearby that led to a small stream, the perfect place to water his horse and rest. As he approached the stream, he saw movement in the distance. The same woman from the night of the storm appeared, tending to a few small plants near the water. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, a mixture of surprise and guarded curiosity. He dismounted slowly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. She did not move immediately. Instead, she observed him carefully, her gaze sharp but not hostile. The cowboy understood the hesitation. Trust was earned, not given. He took a step closer and said softly, "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to make sure you were well after the storm." His voice carried sincerity, and he made sure his movements were gentle, non-threatening. After a moment, she nodded, acknowledging his concern. The tension in her posture softened slightly. There was still caution in her eyes, but it was mixed with curiosity. She had noticed his care during the storm, his patience, and the way he had respected her boundaries. That night had left a mark on both of them, a shared understanding that did not need words. As he approached the stream, he noticed the swelling on her arm again. It had not healed completely. The skin was tender, slightly red, and the area seemed sensitive to touch. The cowboy's concern grew. He had treated it with care the night before, but it was clear that it needed more attention. He hesitated, unsure how to ask without causing embarrassment or fear. Finally, he spoke gently. "It looks like it's still troubling you. Can I take another look?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the nearby village. The other villagers were watching from a distance, curious but cautious. It was not common for a stranger, especially a cowboy, to interact so closely with one of their own. She seemed to weigh her options carefully. After a long pause, she nodded ever so slightly. It was not a full agreement, but it was enough to allow him a closer examination. He knelt down, keeping his hands visible and careful, and looked at the swelling. The sight startled him. It was more serious than he had expected. The skin had a slight discoloration, and the tissue underneath seemed inflamed. The cowboy knew that without proper care, it could worsen. He whispered reassurances, trying to calm her nerves. His voice was soft and steady, carrying a tone of sincerity rather than command. She watched him intently, her body tense but slowly relaxing under his careful attention. The cowboy realized that this moment was delicate. It was more than just a medical concern. It was a test of trust, a quiet exchange that carried meaning far beyond the physical injury. Gently, he cleaned the area with water from the stream, careful not to cause pain. The woman flinched slightly at first, but then relaxed as he worked with skill and patience. He fashioned a simple bandage from cloth he carried, tying it carefully around the swelling to protect it. Each movement was slow, deliberate, and respectful. He spoke softly all the while, explaining what he was doing in a way she could understand through gestures and a few words of broken Spanish he knew, hoping the meaning would be clear. As he worked, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, and carried a weight of years lived alone. It is from before," she said, her eyes avoiding his. The cowboy tilted his head slightly, listening carefully. She continued, "I tried to ignore it. It hurt, but I had no choice." He could see the courage in her words, even as they were simple. She had endured pain quietly, without complaint, and only now allowed someone else to help. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her resilience. He had known hardship himself, but there was something different about watching someone carry their suffering silently, never asking for help until trust was built. It made him think of all the times people had suffered alone, afraid or ashamed to show vulnerability. In that moment, he understood that his role was not just to help physically, but to provide a presence of care and compassion. The woman's hand trembled slightly as she reached for a small piece of cloth, helping him secure the bandage. Her movements were careful, tentative, but it was clear she was allowing him closer than anyone else had been allowed in years. The cowboy noticed the slight swell of her cheek as she breathed deeply, trying to remain composed. He realized she had been carrying not just physical pain, but a burden of isolation and fear. The hours passed quietly as they worked together. The stream's water flowed gently nearby, the rustle of leaves and distant bird calls filling the air. It was a serene environment, contrasting with the stormy night they had first met. The cowboy observed her with gentle eyes, giving space when needed but offering guidance and care when appropriate. There was no rush, no pressure, only patience and presence. By midday, the swelling had reduced slightly, and the woman's face showed a hint of relief. She sat back, brushing her hands together, and allowed herself a small smile, though guarded. The cowboy returned a small nod, acknowledging her bravery and cooperation. There was a quiet understanding between them now, an unspoken bond formed through shared experience and mutual respect. As they sat together by the stream, he noticed her watching him with a mix of curiosity and thoughtfulness. She had questions. He could see it in her eyes, but she did not voice them yet. Instead, she observed quietly, learning about him through small gestures and expressions. The cowboy, in turn, reflected on the unexpected nature of this connection. He had come seeking shelter from a storm, but he had found a human story that was far more profound. The afternoon sun climbed higher, warming the land and drying the damp earth. He knew he would eventually have to leave, to continue his journey across the plains. Yet he felt an unusual reluctance. There was something about this place, and about her, that demanded attention beyond the surface. He wanted to ensure she was truly safe before moving on. He offered her some of the food he carried, simple provisions of bread and dried meat. She accepted cautiously, and they shared a quiet meal by the stream. Conversation was limited, language barriers made it difficult, but gestures, nods, and careful eye contact spoke volumes. They were communicating in a language older than words: trust, care, and respect. Then came a moment that would remain etched in his memory forever. As he reached to adjust the bandage, the woman flinched slightly, and he noticed the swelling had changed in shape. There was something underneath that had not been visible before, a lump that made him stop in surprise. He spoke softly. "It's swelling, deeper than I thought." Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time he saw a flash of fear. He understood immediately that this was serious, that the injury was more complicated than either of them had realized. Yet he remained calm, because panic would only frighten her further. He motioned gently, indicating that he needed to see more clearly. She hesitated, her hands covering the area instinctively, but after a long pause, she allowed him to lift her clothing just enough to examine the swelling properly. What he saw shocked him. It was not simply a minor injury. It was something that required careful attention. The sight was enough to make him realize that without proper care, the situation could worsen rapidly. But there was no fear in his approach, only steady focus and concern. He spoke softly, reassuring her as he assessed the area, and she finally exhaled, allowing him to continue. The moment was intense and intimate, not in a romantic sense, but in the deep trust it represented. She had allowed a stranger into her life, into her vulnerability, and he had accepted the responsibility with care. For both of them, it was a turning point, a shared moment of human connection that went far beyond the physical swelling. It was about courage, trust, and the willingness to accept help when it was needed most. By late afternoon, the immediate danger had been reduced, though the swelling still required attention. The cowboy prepared a makeshift splint and wrapped the area securely. He gave her instructions through gestures and simple words, ensuring she understood how to care for herself until he could return or help could be found. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, and a quiet smile appeared on her face, small but genuine. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the cowboy prepared to leave. He mounted his horse, glancing back at the woman who had allowed him into her life in such an extraordinary way. She stood tall, her posture reflecting resilience and strength, yet there was a softness in her gaze that had not been there before. He tipped his hat and rode away slowly, knowing that their encounter had changed both of them. The plain stretched endlessly before him, and though he continued his journey, The memory of the woman and the swelling that had revealed her courage would remain with him forever. It was a reminder that human connection could appear in the most unexpected places, and that even in the harshest lands, trust and compassion could bloom. The next morning, the cowboy found himself thinking about the Apache widow even before the sun had fully risen. Her quiet strength, her courage in allowing him to help, and the swelling he had discovered weighed heavily on his mind. He had traveled across harsh landscapes and faced many dangers, but this situation was different. It was not just about survival. It was about trust, care, and the fragile balance between two lives intersecting in unexpected ways. He rode slowly back toward the small village, the early light of dawn illuminating the desert plains. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of sage and fresh earth after the previous day's storm. Each hoofbeat on the dry trail seemed to echo his thoughts. He wondered how she had managed through the night, whether the swelling had worsened or if his improvised care had helped. There was a sense of urgency he could not ignore. He felt responsible, not out of obligation but out of respect for her courage. As he approached the village, he saw her tending to her small garden again, just as she had the first time. Her movements were careful, deliberate, but he noticed that her posture carried a slight stiffness, a subtle sign that the swelling still troubled her. She glanced up at him, her eyes widening in surprise, and then softened as she realized it was him. There was no fear this time, only a cautious trust. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, and approached the stream nearby where he knew he could sit and speak with her comfortably. "Good morning," he said softly, tipping his hat. "How did you sleep?" The cowboy studied her carefully, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders and the way her arm moved gingerly. It was clear that the injury was not minor. "I think we need to take care of it properly today," he said gently. "I can help, but we need to be careful." She looked at him, a mixture of apprehension and relief in her eyes. The vulnerability was clear, yet there was trust there, fragile but genuine. After a long pause, she finally nodded, silently agreeing to let him assist her further. He led her to a shaded area near the stream, making sure the ground was comfortable for her to sit. The sound of water flowing gently and the warm sunlight created a calming environment. He spoke in low, steady tones, explaining each step as he prepared to examine her arm. She listened carefully, her eyes focused on him, trusting him in a way that she had not trusted anyone in years. When he lifted her sleeve gently, he noticed that the swelling had changed. The tissue underneath seemed tense and tender, more serious than he had realized. He spoke softly, "It's more serious than I thought. We need to clean it carefully and protect it." She flinched slightly but did not move away. There was a moment of hesitation, and then she allowed him to continue. This act of trust was profound, a silent acknowledgement that he meant no harm and that he could be relied upon. He washed the area with clean water from the stream, his hands steady and precise. The woman flinched at first but gradually relaxed as he worked with care. He could see the pain in her eyes, but there was also relief that someone was finally attending to a problem she had endured quietly for too long. He fashioned a bandage with clean cloth, tying it carefully around the swelling to reduce pressure and protect it. As he worked, she finally spoke again. "It happened a long time ago. I tried to ignore it. I didn't want anyone to know," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the flowing water. He nodded gently, understanding the weight of her words. People often suffered in silence, hiding pain out of fear or pride. This moment was not just about healing an injury. It was about offering care, compassion, and respect for someone's hidden struggles. The cowboy looked at her with quiet admiration. "You've been very strong," he said. "It's not easy to endure pain alone. But now you don't have to do it by yourself." She glanced at him briefly, and for a fleeting moment a small smile appeared on her lips. It was subtle, but it conveyed trust, relief, and a sense of connection that went beyond words. Time passed slowly. He worked patiently, checking the swelling, making small adjustments to the bandage, and explaining through gestures how she could care for herself until he could return. The woman observed him closely, learning from his actions and absorbing the care he offered. Each gesture, each careful movement built a quiet bond between them. It was a bond of trust, respect, and shared humanity. The sun rose higher, warming the land and drying the damp earth from the storm. The cowboy noticed that her movements were becoming more comfortable, the tension easing slightly. Yet he could still see the discomfort, the subtle pain that lingered despite his efforts. He realized that this required more than simple care. It required attention, patience, and understanding. "I need to make sure it doesn't get worse," he said softly. "We have to be cautious." She nodded, allowing him to continue. This was more than a physical task. It was a moment of mutual respect and understanding. Each action he took was careful, deliberate, and respectful of her space and dignity. She trusted him enough to let him guide her through a delicate process that required vulnerability and courage. As he tended to her arm, she spoke again, sharing fragments of her life. She spoke of loss, of surviving alone, and of the hardships she had faced. He listened intently, his presence steady and supportive. He did not interrupt, and he did not offer empty words. He simply listened, allowing her to share what she had carried silently for years. It was a moment of deep connection, a shared understanding of resilience and endurance. Suddenly, the swelling shifted slightly, revealing a small lump beneath the surface. The cowboy's eyes widened in surprise. "It's deeper than I thought," he said softly, his tone calm but serious. The woman's eyes widened as well, and she instinctively covered the area with her hand. There was fear in her gaze, but also a willingness to allow him to help. She trusted him, and that trust made the moment even more significant. He moved slowly, carefully lifting her clothing just enough to examine the swelling fully. What he saw startled him. It was not a minor injury, but something that needed immediate attention. Yet there was no fear in his demeanor, only focus, patience, and care. He whispered reassurances, explaining each step through gestures and calm words, keeping her at ease. This moment was profound. It was not about physical examination alone. It was about trust, courage, and the human connection that had formed between them. The woman had allowed him into her vulnerability, and he accepted the responsibility with respect and care. It was a turning point, a moment where fear was met with compassion, and isolation was met with understanding. Hours passed as he worked with patience and precision. The woman gradually relaxed, allowing him to secure the bandage and adjust the swelling carefully. He showed her how to care for it, using simple gestures and words. She followed his instructions, nodding occasionally, and a quiet smile appeared on her face. It was small but genuine, a sign of relief, trust, and appreciation. The afternoon sun began to soften, casting long shadows across the plains. The cowboy realized that the immediate danger had been reduced, but the swelling still required ongoing care. He knew he would not abandon her, that he would return to ensure she was safe. This was no longer just about a simple injury. It was about human connection, compassion, and the quiet strength that comes from shared understanding. As they sat together, watching the stream flow gently, the woman finally spoke more openly. She told him stories of her life, of survival, and of the quiet determination that had kept her going. The cowboy listened with deep respect, understanding that each word carried the weight of experience and resilience. Their bond deepened with each shared moment, each gesture of care, and each acknowledgement of trust. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold. The cowboy prepared to leave, knowing that his presence had made a difference, yet reluctant to depart from the woman who had entrusted him with her vulnerability. She stood tall, her posture reflecting strength and resilience, but her eyes carried a softness that had not been there before, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection they had formed. He tipped his hat one last time and mounted his horse, glancing back at her. There were no words necessary. The trust, care, and respect they had shared spoke volumes. He rode slowly away, feeling the weight of the experience in his heart. The plain stretched endlessly before him, yet the memory of the woman, the swelling, and the bond they had formed would remain with him forever. It was a lesson in patience, compassion, and understanding. He had come seeking shelter from a storm, but had found a human story of courage and resilience. He had learned that true care required more than physical attention. It required respect, trust, and the willingness to meet someone where they were, even in the most vulnerable moments. As the evening settled over the plains, the cowboy continued his journey, carrying with him the memory of a woman who had endured silently, who had allowed him into her life, and who had taught him the profound power of trust and compassion. The swelling had revealed more than injury. It had revealed courage, humanity, and the quiet bonds that can form between two strangers in the vastness of the world. The morning light spilled gently over the plains, painting the landscape in soft gold and pink hues. The cowboy rode slowly toward the small village once more, the memory of the Apache widow fresh in his mind. He had spent the past nights reflecting on the bond they had formed, the trust, the courage, and the shared understanding that had grown between them. Each mile brought a mix of anticipation and concern. He hoped that she had been able to rest, and that the care he had given her had made a difference. When he arrived, the widow was already outside, tending to her small garden. Her movements were steadier than the day before, yet there was still a subtle caution in the way she carried herself. Her arm, though better, still showed traces of swelling and tenderness. The cowboy dismounted slowly, approaching her with the same care and respect he had shown from the beginning. She glanced at him, her eyes wide but calm, and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. "Good morning," he said gently, tipping his hat. "How are you feeling today?" There was a resilience in her that impressed him more each day, a quiet courage that had been hidden beneath years of solitude and hardship. He led her to the shaded area near the stream once again, where they could sit comfortably. The air was warm, and the gentle flow of water provided a soothing background. He motioned for her to sit while he examined her arm carefully. The swelling had reduced further, but he noticed small bruises and tenderness that indicated she still needed careful attention. His eyes softened with concern, but his hands remained steady and gentle. "This needs a little more care," he said softly. "We'll make sure it heals properly." She looked at him, a mixture of trust and gratitude in her eyes, and allowed him to work. The cowboy cleaned the area carefully, using the water from the stream and the cloth he had brought. Each movement was deliberate, gentle, and respectful, ensuring that she felt comfortable and safe. As he worked, the widow began to speak more freely. She shared stories of her past, of the hardships she had endured, the losses she had suffered, and the strength she had found within herself to survive. The cowboy listened attentively, never interrupting, offering only a steady presence. He realized that this was just as important as tending to her arm. Listening, acknowledging, and being present were forms of care that often mattered more than any physical treatment. Hours passed, and the bond between them deepened. She allowed him to adjust the bandage, to examine the swelling more closely, and to provide guidance on how to prevent it from worsening. Each act of care was met with her cooperation, a silent trust that had grown steadily over the past days. The cowboy felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had not only helped physically, but had also built a connection that transcended words. The sun climbed higher, and the warmth of the day made the desert shimmer. The cowboy noticed that her expressions had softened, the tension in her shoulders easing. She had grown more comfortable in his presence, no longer flinching at his movements or gestures. There was a quiet strength in her demeanor, a confidence born from both recovery and the trust they had established. Then came a moment that would forever remain etched in his memory. As he adjusted the bandage one final time, he noticed the swelling shifting slightly, revealing more than he had expected. He looked closely, and his eyes widened in surprise. It was not merely a minor injury. There was a deeper issue that had been hidden beneath the surface. He spoke softly. "It's a bit more complicated than I thought. We need to handle this carefully." She hesitated, instinctively covering the area, but then slowly allowed him to lift her clothing just enough to examine it properly. Her trust was complete now, evident in the way she remained still and calm despite the vulnerability of the moment. What he saw shocked him, yet he remained composed. He realized that with careful attention and patience, the swelling could be managed and healing could continue. The widow, observing his calm demeanor, felt a mixture of relief and awe. She had allowed a stranger into her life in a moment of vulnerability, and he had met that trust with unwavering care and respect. It was a profound moment of human connection, one that neither of them would forget. The cowboy worked methodically, adjusting the bandage, cleaning the area, and applying gentle pressure to reduce the swelling. He explained each step through gestures and simple words, ensuring she understood what he was doing. She followed his instructions carefully, nodding occasionally, and the tension in her body eased further. There was a quiet rhythm to their movements, a silent communication that transcended language. As the afternoon sun began to soften, the cowboy suggested they take a brief rest. They sat together by the stream, the gentle flow of water providing a soothing backdrop. She finally allowed herself a small, genuine smile, a reflection of relief, trust, and the deep bond that had formed between them. The cowboy returned the smile with a nod, silently acknowledging the courage and resilience she had shown. Time passed slowly, and the evening approached with a warm, golden glow. The cowboy knew that he would soon have to leave, yet he felt a reluctance to depart. He had come seeking shelter from a storm, but he had found something far more significant, a connection rooted in trust, care, and shared humanity. He wanted to ensure that she was truly safe before continuing his journey. He prepared his horse, adjusting the saddle and supplies, while she watched from a short distance. There was no need for words. Their shared understanding was enough. She had regained confidence in her ability to care for herself, and he had ensured that the swelling would not worsen. The trust between them was complete, a bond forged through vulnerability, patience, and compassion. Before leaving, he spoke softly, "I will check on you again soon. You've been very brave." She nodded, her eyes reflecting gratitude and respect. She had allowed him into her life in a moment of need, and he had honored that trust fully. It was a moment of mutual respect, an acknowledgement of strength and humanity on both sides. As he mounted his horse and prepared to ride away, the widow returned to her garden. She moved with a newfound steadiness, tending to her plants with care and focus. The cowboy watched her for a moment, taking in the resilience and quiet strength she displayed. Then he turned, riding slowly across the plains, the setting sun casting long shadows behind him. The journey ahead was long, but the memory of the woman and the bond they had formed stayed with him. He thought about the swelling that had revealed her vulnerability, the trust she had placed in him, and the shared moments of care and understanding. It was a powerful reminder that even in the harshest and most isolated places, human connection could flourish. By the time night fell, the cowboy had reached a small ridge overlooking the plains. He dismounted and gazed at the horizon, reflecting on the days that had passed. He realized that life was full of unexpected encounters, moments that could teach lessons about courage, compassion, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. The Apache widow had shown him resilience and bravery, and he had learned that care and trust could create bonds that transcended culture, language, and distance. As he rode onward, he felt a sense of fulfillment. He had faced uncertainty, navigated cultural boundaries, and provided care when it was needed most. The memory of the woman, the swelling, and the trust they had shared remained vivid in his mind. He knew that their encounter would stay with him forever, a reminder of the power of compassion and the enduring impact of human connection. Days later, he returned briefly to the village, ensuring that she was safe and that the swelling had improved. She greeted him with a warm nod and a subtle smile, showing that she remembered and appreciated the care he had given. Their bond, though simple and unspoken, was strong, a testament to the respect and understanding that had grown between them. The cowboy left again, continuing his journey across the plains. He carried with him the lessons he had learned. That courage could be quiet, that vulnerability could be met with care, and that human connection could appear in the most unexpected places. The memory of the Apache widow and the swelling that had revealed more than injury would remain with him always, a story of trust, compassion, and shared humanity in a vast, untamed world. As he rode into the horizon, the sun setting in brilliant shades of orange and purple, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had come seeking shelter from a storm, but he had found something far more meaningful, a human connection that would remain in his heart forever. The plains stretched endlessly, but the lessons he had learned and the bond he had formed made the vastness of the land feel smaller, warmer, and filled with the quiet power of trust and care.